The gentle hum of jet engines filled the business-class cabin as Flight AA-714 cruised at 35,000 feet. Among the passengers sat Andre Thompson, though most people knew him simply as Andy. Despite his net worth approaching $11 billion, he preferred keeping a low profile, usually wearing simple clothing and traveling without an entourage. Today was no different. Dressed in a comfortable navy sweater and khaki pants, he was absorbed in reading financial reports on his tablet. His fellow passengers had no idea that the man in seat 4C owned one of the largest tech companies in Silicon Valley. The first sign of trouble came when Andy pressed the call button, hoping to request a glass of water. The flight attendant, Patricia Wells, had been having a particularly stressful day. Her response to seeing the call light from 4C was already tinged with irritation before she even reached his row. "What do you need?" she asked curtly, not bothering with the usual professional courtesy she showed to other business-class passengers. Andy looked up from his tablet, offering a polite smile. "Could I please have a glass of water?" Patricia's expression shifted from irritation to barely concealed disdain. "You'll have to wait. I'm busy with other passengers." She turned away abruptly, despite the visible lack of any other passengers requiring attention. Andy noticed how she immediately attended to the passenger across the aisle when they pressed their call button moments later. He took a deep breath, remembering similar situations he'd faced throughout his life, even after building his company from the ground up. 20 minutes passed, and Andy's throat was parched from the dry cabin air. He pressed the call button again. This time, Patricia's approach was even more hostile. "I told you to wait," she snapped, her voice carrying across the cabin. Several passengers looked up from their books and screens. "Ma'am," Andy began calmly, "I've been waiting for 20 minutes. I would just like some water, please." What happened next shocked everyone in the cabin. Patricia's face contorted with anger, and before anyone could react, she slapped Andy across the face. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. "How dare you talk back to me," she hissed, her professional demeanor completely abandoned. Andy touched his cheek, more stunned than hurt. The cabin erupted in gasps and murmurs. A nearby passenger was already recording the incident on their phone. The lead flight attendant, hearing the commotion, rushed over. "Patricia. What's going on here?" But before Patricia could respond, another passenger spoke up. "She just slapped him. For no reason. He just asked for water." The lead flight attendant's face paled as she recognized Andy. Unlike Patricia, she was familiar with the tech industry's leading figures. "Mr. Thompson, I am so incredibly sorry," she stammered. Patricia's expression changed from anger to confusion, then to horror as the lead flight attendant used Andy's surname. Her hands began to shake as she realized who she had just assaulted. "Thompson?" "As in Thompson Tech," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Andy straightened in his seat, his dignity intact despite the red mark on his cheek. "Yes, that Thompson Tech," he said quietly. "Though I don't believe my company affiliation should matter. No passenger deserves to be treated this way, regardless of who they are." The incident had already gone viral on social media before the plane landed. Camera phones had captured everything, and within hours, millions had witnessed Patricia's discriminatory behavior and its aftermath. But what happened next would surprise everyone, especially Patricia. Instead of immediately pressing charges or demanding her termination, Andy Thompson would handle the situation in a way that would change not just Patricia's life, but the lives of thousands of airline employees across the country. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and the events that would unfold in the coming days would spark a national conversation about prejudice, privilege, and the power of responding to hate with understanding. As Flight AA-714 touched down, Patricia felt her world crumbling around her. Airport security was waiting at the gate, along with airline management. The video of her slapping Andy Thompson had already reached the airline's corporate headquarters, and social media was ablaze with outrage. In the terminal, reporters had somehow gotten wind of the story. Camera flashes erupted as Andy emerged from the jet bridge, the mark on his face still visible. Security personnel formed a protective barrier around him, but instead of rushing past the media, he did something unexpected. He stopped. "Mr. Thompson. Will you be pressing charges?" shouted one reporter. "Are you planning to sue the airline?" called another. Andy raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "What happened today reflects a larger problem in our society," he began, his voice steady and thoughtful. "But it's not going to be solved through lawsuits or punishment alone." Meanwhile, Patricia was escorted to a private office in the terminal, where she sat trembling before two airline executives. Her 20-year career flashed before her eyes as she waited for the inevitable termination notice. The door opened, and to everyone's surprise, Andy Thompson walked in. "May I have a moment alone with Ms. Wells?" he asked quietly. The executives exchanged glances before nodding and stepping out. Patricia couldn't bring herself to meet Andy's eyes as he sat down across from her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what came over me. I've never done anything like this before." Andy studied her for a moment. "Tell me about yourself, Patricia. How long have you been flying?" His gentle tone broke something in her. The words poured out, about her struggles as a single mother, the stress of recent route changes that kept her away from home longer, the mounting pressure of trying to maintain a professional demeanor through exhausting flights and difficult passengers. "None of that excuses what I did," she finished, wiping her eyes. "I let my prejudices and stress get the better of me. I deserve to lose my job." Andy leaned forward. "Yes, what you did was wrong. But firing you won't solve the underlying problems that led to this moment. Instead, I have a proposal." He outlined his plan, and Patricia's eyes widened with each detail. Instead of pressing charges or demanding her termination, Andy wanted to use this incident as a catalyst for change. He proposed creating a comprehensive training program for airline staff, focusing on stress management, implicit bias recognition, and cultural sensitivity. "You'll help develop it," he told her. "Your experience, both good and bad, will be valuable in identifying where the system needs improvement." Word of Andy's decision spread quickly, generating mixed reactions. Some praised his compassion, while others argued he was being too lenient. But Andy stood firm in his conviction that transformative justice was more effective than punitive measures. The airline CEO, initially prepared for a PR disaster and potential lawsuit, was stunned by Andy's approach. In an emergency board meeting, Andy presented a detailed proposal for an industry-wide initiative, the Aviation Inclusion and Wellness Program. "This isn't just about diversity training," he explained to the board. "It's about addressing the systemic pressures that can turn good people into their worst selves. We need to look at scheduling practices, support systems, and workplace culture as a whole." Patricia, suspended but not terminated, spent the next week writing a detailed account of her experience and the factors that contributed to her breakdown. Her honest self-reflection would become the foundation for case studies in the new program. Social media continued to buzz with updates about the story. But instead of the usual cycle of public shaming and career destruction, people were witnessing something different, a masterclass in turning a moment of darkness into an opportunity for growth. As the week drew to a close, Andy's company announced a $50 million investment in aviation industry reform, focusing on employee wellness and anti-discrimination initiatives. The program would include mental health support for flight crews, revised scheduling practices to prevent burnout, and comprehensive cultural competency training. But the most powerful moment was yet to come, as Patricia prepared to face her colleagues and share her story in the first pilot session of the new training program. The journey from that terrible moment on the plane to this opportunity for redemption had been challenging, but it was about to inspire changes that would ripple through the entire aviation industry. The conference room at the airline's training center was packed. 200 flight attendants, pilots, and ground staff sat in tense silence as Patricia walked to the podium. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice was clear when she began to speak. 3 weeks ago, I became viral for all the wrong reasons, she started. I was the flight attendant who slapped a passenger, not just any passenger, but Andy Thompson. But this isn't a story about him being a billionaire. It's about how prejudice and stress can poison even the most experienced professionals. As Patricia shared her story, including the mounting pressures that had led to her breakdown, heads began to nod throughout the audience. Many could relate to the challenging schedules, the emotional toll of constantly being in service mode, and the unconscious biases they'd never fully addressed. In the back of the room, Andy Thompson stood quietly, observing the session. He watched as Patricia's vulnerability created a space for others to share their experiences. One by one, crew members stood up to tell their own stories of burnout, bias, and breaking points narrowly avoided. The Aviation Inclusion and Wellness Program was unlike anything the industry had seen before. Instead of traditional sensitivity training videos and multiple-choice tests, it focused on real conversations and practical solutions. Mental health professionals were now available at major crew bases. Schedule reform allowed for better work-life balance. Most importantly, the program created safe spaces for difficult conversations about bias and discrimination. The media's interest in the story evolved from sensational headlines about the slap to thoughtful discussions about workplace culture and systemic change. News channels that had initially rushed to condemn Patricia now featured in-depth reports about airline industry working conditions and the innovative approach to addressing them. 1 month into the program, the first success stories began emerging. A senior pilot shared how the new mental health resources had helped him address long-ignored anxiety issues. A ground crew supervisor credited the bias training with helping her recognize and correct unfair treatment in her team. Flight attendants reported feeling more supported and better equipped to handle stressful situations. Patricia, though still suspended from flight duties, found purpose in her new role as a program facilitator. She worked closely with Andy's team, helping to refine the training materials based on participant feedback. Her honest accounts of her journey from that terrible day became a powerful teaching tool. The easy path would have been to fire me and create a new policy manual, Patricia told a group of trainee flight attendants. But Mr. Thompson understood that real change requires more than just punishment and paperwork. It requires us to look at the human factors that lead to these incidents. Andy's investment in the program extended beyond the initial $50 million. His tech company developed a wellness app specifically for airline crew members, helping them manage sleep schedules, access mental health resources, and connect with peer support groups. The app quickly became popular across multiple airlines. 3 months after the incident, the program faced its first major test. A video surfaced of another flight attendant losing their temper with a passenger on a different airline. Instead of the usual cycle of public shaming and termination, the airline implemented the Aviation Inclusion and Wellness Program's intervention protocol. The incident became a case study in how to handle workplace stress and bias proactively. The aviation industry began to see measurable changes. Reports of passenger crew conflicts decreased. Employee satisfaction scores improved. Other industries took notice, with several major hotel chains and retail corporations requesting information about implementing similar programs. Patricia's journey became a symbol of transformation. She received hundreds of messages from airline employees thanking her for sparking a long-overdue conversation about workplace culture and mental health. Even those who had initially called for her firing began to see the value in Andy's approach to restorative justice. One evening, as Patricia was leaving the training center, she found Andy waiting in the lobby. He had just finished reviewing the program's quarterly results. "How are you holding up?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Patricia smiled, more confident than she'd been in months. It's still challenging, she admitted. But for the first time in my career, I feel like I'm making a real difference. Andy nodded, understanding the weight of her words. What had started as a moment of shame had evolved into a movement for change. But as they both knew, the most significant challenges, and opportunities, still lay ahead. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Andy Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at the National Transportation Conference in Chicago. The audience included executives from every major airline in the country, along with representatives from railway companies, bus lines, and cruise ships. Transportation isn't just about moving people from point A to point B, Andy began, his voice carrying through the hushed room. It's about human connection. And sometimes, those connections break down in ways we never expected. He gestured to Patricia, who sat in the front row. She was back in her flight attendant uniform for the first time since the incident, having recently been cleared to return to limited flight duties. The airline's decision to reinstate her had sparked intense debate, but the data supported their choice. Companies implementing the Aviation Inclusion and Wellness Program had seen a 60% reduction in crew passenger incidents. Ms. Wells could have become just another viral cautionary tale, Andy continued. Instead, she helped us understand something crucial. Behind every workplace incident, there's a complex web of human factors we need to address. The presentation that followed revealed stunning statistics. Airlines participating in the program reported not only fewer incidents but also improved crew retention rates, better customer satisfaction scores, and significant cost savings from reduced turnover and litigation. But the most powerful moment came when Patricia took the stage to share a series of anonymous testimonials from program participants. A ground crew supervisor who realized he had been unconsciously favoring certain employees based on their backgrounds. A flight attendant who finally sought help for post-traumatic stress after witnessing a medical emergency mid-flight. A pilot who learned to recognize signs of fatigue in his colleagues and spoke up before it became dangerous. In the audience, transportation industry leaders began to see beyond the initial controversy. This wasn't just about preventing discrimination or managing stress, it was about fundamentally transforming workplace culture. After the conference, media coverage shifted dramatically. Headlines now read, "Aviation Industry Leads the Way in Workplace Culture Revolution," and "Thompson's Response to Airline Incident Sparks National Change." But success brought new challenges. As more companies adopted the program, some tried to implement it superficially, seeing it as a quick fix for PR problems. Andy and Patricia found themselves fighting to maintain the program's integrity. "This isn't about checking boxes or completing modules," Patricia explained to a group of airline executives who wanted to rush through implementation. "It's about creating lasting change in how we support and respect each other." The program's impact extended beyond the workplace. Crew members reported taking the lessons home, having difficult but necessary conversations with family members about bias and privilege. Some started community groups to address discrimination in their neighborhoods. One day, while reviewing program feedback, Patricia received an email that brought tears to her eyes. It was from a passenger who had been on flight AA714 that fateful day. "I filmed the incident on my phone, ready to post it and demand your firing," the passenger wrote. "But watching how Mr. Thompson and the airline handled it made me reconsider my own reactive behavior. I've since joined a community dialogue group about addressing bias. Thank you for turning your mistake into a movement." Andy's tech company continued developing tools to support the program. They launched a virtual reality training module that allowed transportation workers to experience challenging situations from different perspectives. The technology helped participants understand how their actions and attitudes affected others. The program faced its critics too. Some called it too lenient on serious misconduct, while others dismissed it as corporate virtue signaling. But the results spoke for themselves. Companies that fully implemented the program saw dramatic improvements in workplace culture and customer service. Patricia's own journey became a case study in redemption and growth. She split her time between flying and facilitating training sessions, bringing authenticity and hard-earned wisdom to both roles. Her presence on flights often led to meaningful conversations with passengers about forgiveness and second chances. During one such flight, an elderly passenger recognized her from the news coverage. Instead of judgment, the woman offered words that captured the essence of the program's success. "You know, dear," she said, holding Patricia's hand, "it's not about never making mistakes. It's about what we learn from them and how we help others learn too." The aviation industry began attracting attention from unexpected quarters. Silicon Valley companies, hospitals, and even government agencies sent representatives to observe the program. They all wanted to understand how a moment of conflict had transformed into a blueprint for organizational change. As the program's first anniversary approached, Andy and Patricia met to discuss its future. They sat in the same airport where they'd had their first post-incident conversation, but everything else had changed. The morning sun streamed through the airport terminal's windows as Andy pulled out his tablet, showing Patricia the latest data from the program's implementation across different industries. What had started in aviation had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. "Look at these numbers," Andy said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "The program has been adopted by 15 major transportation companies, 3 hospital networks, and even a school district. But what's most interesting is how each sector is adapting it to address their unique challenges." Patricia leaned forward, studying the statistics. She remembered the day, just 2 months ago, when she'd received an invitation to speak at a major healthcare conference. The medical community had taken notice of the program's success in handling high-stress situations and wanted to learn more. "I never thought I'd be teaching doctors about stress management," Patricia chuckled, but her eyes were serious. "Their struggles are so similar to what we face in aviation: long hours, high pressure, the need to maintain composure in challenging situations." The program's expansion hadn't been without its hurdles. Each new industry brought unique challenges that required careful adaptation of the training materials. But the core principles, addressing systemic pressures, recognizing bias, and promoting wellness, remained universal. One of the most surprising developments came from the education sector. A large urban school district had implemented a modified version of the program to help teachers and administrators handle classroom conflicts. The results were remarkable: decreased disciplinary incidents, improved teacher retention, and better student-teacher relationships. "Yesterday, I received a letter from a high school principal," Patricia shared, pulling out her phone to read it. She said that after implementing our program, they saw a 40% reduction in student suspensions. Teachers were learning to recognize their triggers and biases before situations escalated. The tech component of the program had evolved as well. Andy's company had developed industry-specific versions of the wellness app, each tailored to address unique workplace challenges. The healthcare version, for instance, included specialized features for managing rotating shifts and processing traumatic events. But perhaps the most meaningful impact was happening on a personal level. Patricia had recently started a support group for transportation workers who'd faced similar incidents. The group provided a safe space for people to share their experiences and learn from each other's journeys. During one particularly moving session, a bus driver shared how the program had helped him recognize and address his own biases before they led to a serious incident. "I was becoming bitter," he admitted, "but the training helped me see how my attitudes were affecting my passengers. Now, I approach each day with a different mindset." The media narrative had evolved too. Journalists who'd initially focused on the sensational aspects of the original incident were now writing in-depth pieces about workplace culture and systemic change. A major business magazine had recently featured the program in a cover story titled "The Thompson Effect: How One Incident Revolutionized Workplace Culture." International interest was growing as well. Airlines from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East had begun implementing versions of the program, each adapted to their cultural contexts. Patricia found herself conducting training sessions via video conference with crews from around the world. One afternoon, while preparing for an international training session, Patricia received an unexpected visitor at her office. It was the lead flight attendant from Flight AA-714, the one who had recognized Andy that day. "I've been watching everything you've accomplished," she said, hugging Patricia warmly. "You turned what could have been the worst day of your career into something that's helping people worldwide. That takes incredible strength." The program's success had also sparked important conversations about justice and accountability in the workplace. Rather than simply punishing misconduct, companies were learning to address root causes and create opportunities for growth and redemption. Andy's approach to handling the initial incident had become a case study in leadership. Business schools were teaching it as an example of how compassionate leadership could drive meaningful organizational change. "You know what's most remarkable?" Andy said, looking up from his tablet. "Other companies are starting to report that the program is preventing incidents before they happen. People are recognizing their triggers and biases early and getting help before things escalate." Patricia nodded, thinking about her own journey. "It's like ripples in a pond," she mused. One moment of crisis, handled with wisdom and compassion, can create waves of positive change. As they wrapped up their meeting, a young flight attendant approached their table, nervously clutching a training manual. She had recognized them both and wanted to share how the program had impacted her first year on the job. "The old-timers tell me how different things are now," she said. "We're not just learning procedures and policies, we're learning how to take care of ourselves and each other. It makes all the difference." Looking at the young woman's eager face, Patricia felt a deep sense of purpose. The incident that had almost ended her career had instead become a catalyst for transformation. But as she and Andy both knew, there was still more work to be done. 18 months after the incident, Andy Thompson stood in his office overlooking Silicon Valley, reviewing the latest proposal for expanding the program. On his desk sat a report from the National Institute for Workplace Culture, documenting the program's impact across multiple industries. But what caught his eye was a small handwritten note that had arrived that morning. "Dear Mr. Thompson," it read, "I'm a 12-year-old girl from Minnesota. Our school started using your program 3 months ago. Yesterday, my teacher stopped a bullying incident in our classroom, but instead of just punishing the bully, she helped us understand why it happened. Both kids are friends now. Thank you for showing us a different way to handle problems." The note perfectly captured what the program had become, not just a workplace training initiative, but a new approach to handling conflict and promoting understanding in all areas of life. That afternoon, Andy had a video call scheduled with Patricia, who was now traveling the country as the program's lead ambassador. She had just finished speaking at a conference where law enforcement agencies were exploring how to adapt the program's principles to police training. "You won't believe what happened today," Patricia began, her face glowing with excitement on the screen. "A police chief approached me after my presentation. He said implementing our de-escalation techniques had reduced use of force incidents by 45% in his department. They're now using our virtual reality modules to train officers in bias recognition and stress management." The program's expansion into law enforcement had been unexpected but logical. The same principles that helped flight attendants handle difficult situations were proving valuable for police officers, teachers, healthcare workers, anyone whose job involved high-stress interactions with the public. Research universities had begun studying the program's methodology, documenting its effects on workplace culture and human behavior. The results were compelling enough that several state governments were considering making similar training mandatory for public service positions. But success brought new challenges. As demand for the program grew, maintaining its quality and integrity became increasingly important. Andy and Patricia had to carefully select and train facilitators who could deliver the program with the same authenticity and impact that had made it successful. They established a certification process for trainers, requiring them to undergo intensive preparation that included understanding the psychological principles behind the program and experiencing their own journey of self-reflection. One day, while reviewing trainer applications, Patricia came across a familiar name, the passenger who had recorded the original incident on flight AA714. They had applied to become a program facilitator, writing in their application, "I want to help others understand what I learned that day, that behind every viral moment of conflict, there are human beings capable of growth and change." The program's impact was also being felt in unexpected places. Professional sports teams had adopted portions of the training for their athletes and staff. Tech companies were incorporating its principles into their artificial intelligence ethics guidelines. Even reality TV producers had started consulting with the program's team about handling on-camera conflicts more constructively. Andy's company continued to innovate, developing new tools to support the program's mission. They created an AI-powered app that could help users recognize patterns in their behavior and emotional responses, providing real-time guidance for managing stressful situations. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected quarter. A group of high school students who had experienced the program through their teachers started a peer mentoring initiative called Ripple Effect. The student-led program helped teenagers apply the principles of bias recognition and conflict resolution in their daily lives. Patricia was invited to speak at one of their meetings, and what she saw moved her to tears. Teenagers from different backgrounds were having open, honest conversations about prejudice, privilege, and personal growth. They were taking the lessons learned from her mistake and using them to shape a better future. During a break in the meeting, one student approached Patricia with a question that made her pause. "Ms. Wells, do you ever regret what happened that day on the plane?" Patricia thought carefully before answering. "I regret the pain I caused," she said slowly. "But I don't regret what it taught me, and what it's allowing us to teach others. Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our greatest contributions." The student nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I love about this program," she said. "It doesn't just tell us not to make mistakes. It shows us how to learn from them and help others learn too." As the program approached its second year, Andy and Patricia found themselves preparing for their biggest challenge yet. The United Nations had expressed interest in adapting the program for international peacekeeping operations. The potential to impact conflict resolution on a global scale was both exciting and daunting. One evening, after a long day of meetings with UN representatives, Andy received an unexpected call from his mother. She had been watching a documentary about the program's impact and had a simple question: "Did you know, that day on the plane, that this would happen?" Andy smiled, remembering the split-second decision he'd made not to press charges, to look for a better solution. "No," he answered honestly. "I just knew that responding to hurt with more hurt wouldn't solve anything." The media had started referring to this approach as the Thompson Principle, the idea that moments of conflict, when handled with wisdom and compassion, could become catalysts for positive change. But for Andy and Patricia, it was simply about recognizing the humanity in each other, even in their worst moments. 2 years to the day after the incident on flight AA714, Andy Thompson found himself back in the same airport, at the same gate. But this time, he wasn't just another passenger. He was there to witness something extraordinary. The airline had chosen this symbolic date to launch its new flagship training center, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to the aviation inclusion and wellness program. The center would serve as a global hub for training transportation professionals from around the world. As Andy walked through the terminal, he noticed how much had changed. The security staff moved with a new awareness, engaging with passengers more thoughtfully. Gate agents handled stressed travelers with enhanced empathy. Even the busy coffee shop staff seemed more attuned to the human aspects of their interactions. Patricia was there too, preparing to lead the center's inaugural training session. She looked different now, confident, purposeful, at peace with her past. The nervous, defensive flight attendant from 2 years ago had transformed into a respected leader in workplace culture transformation. "I had a dream last night," she told Andy as they waited for the ceremony to begin. "I was back on that flight, but this time, I saw myself through different eyes. I wanted to reach through time and tell myself that the worst moment of my life would become its greatest purpose." The opening ceremony brought together people from all walks of life who had been touched by the program. There was the police officer who had completely reimagined his department's community engagement approach. The teacher whose classroom had become a model for conflict resolution. The airline CEO whose initial skepticism had turned into passionate advocacy. But perhaps most moving were the students from the Ripple Effect program, now expanded to hundreds of schools nationwide. They shared stories of how learning about bias and conflict resolution had changed not just their school environment, but their families and communities as well. A young student named David took the podium, his voice clear and confident. "Before this program came to our school, I was angry all the time. I thought being strong meant never backing down. Now I know that real strength is being able to understand others, even when it's hard." The United Nations implementation was progressing too. Pilot programs in peacekeeping missions had shown promising results, with trained facilitators helping to bridge cultural gaps and resolve conflicts before they escalated. The Thompson Principle was being studied in diplomatic circles as a new approach to international relations. During the ceremony, Andy unveiled the next phase of the program, a global initiative called Beyond Bias. Using advanced technology and time-tested human wisdom, the project would work to create spaces for difficult conversations and transformation in communities around the world. What happened on Flight AA714 wasn't just about one passenger and one flight attendant, Andy told the assembled crowd. It was about all of us, our prejudices, our pressures, our potential to hurt each other, and our even greater potential to heal. Patricia's turn at the podium brought tears to many eyes. She shared how the program had not only saved her career but had given her life new meaning. "Every day, I meet people who tell me how this program changed their lives," she said. "But the truth is, they changed their own lives. We just showed them it was possible." The impact of the program had begun to show up in unexpected ways. Companies reported improved bottom lines due to reduced turnover and litigation. Schools saw better academic performance alongside decreased disciplinary issues. But the most significant changes were harder to measure: the conflicts that never escalated, the biases that were recognized and addressed, the understanding that grew where fear once lived. Research universities had started documenting what they called the ripple effect of redemption, how one instance of choosing understanding over punishment could create waves of positive change through families, workplaces, and communities. After the ceremony, Andy and Patricia took a quiet moment to walk through the new training center. The walls were lined with stories of transformation, letters, photos, and testimonials from people whose lives had been touched by the program. They stopped at a large window overlooking the airport runway. Below them, planes took off and landed in an endless dance of human connection. Each aircraft carried hundreds of people, each with their own biases, struggles, and potential for both conflict and understanding. "You know what I've learned from all this?" Patricia said, watching a plane lift into the evening sky. "Change doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in small moments, when we choose to see each other's humanity." Andy nodded, remembering that day 2 years ago. "And sometimes," he added, "what seems like an ending is really just a beginning." As they turned to leave, they passed a group of new flight attendants starting their training. The young trainees watched with wide eyes as Patricia and Andy walked by, recognizing the two people whose story had changed their industry. One of the trainees gathered the courage to speak up. "Ms. Wells? Mr. Thompson? Would you tell us about that day? The real story?" Patricia and Andy exchanged glances, then smiled. They'd told this story hundreds of times, but it never got old. Because it wasn't just their story anymore, it belonged to everyone who had ever found hope in the possibility of transformation. As they began to share their experience once again, both knew that this wasn't really the end of the story. It was just another beginning, another ripple in an ever-expanding wave of change. Outside, the sun set over the airport, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Planes continued their celestial dance, carrying thousands of people, each with their own story, their own potential for change. And somewhere in those stories, the seeds of understanding continued to grow, nurtured by the simple truth that had started it all, that in our most human moments, whether magnificent or mistakes, lies the potential for transformation.